Good to be with you all in the house of the Lord. A few months ago, Seth asked if we could start meeting together to go over how to study the Bible. And I was immediately impressed with Seth's ability to understand Scripture, see Scripture, and the kinds of questions that he was asking. And it became real clear that not only was he interested in studying the Bible, but he began coming to our prayer nights and wanted to learn how to pray. And one of the things that excited me about that was it's real easy for the mind to get separated from the heart. And I'm excited about this young man because he wants to have both together. And so invited him after his insights, and he's been in 1 Samuel forever. I don't know how long we've been talking about the Old Testament. And he had such wonderful insights that I asked him if he'd be willing to share that in the message. And so, Seth, we're glad to have you. Love you.
You said all that and you spelled my name wrong. If you'll stand with me for the reading of God's Word. All right. Today we're reading in 1 Samuel 25, verses 23 through 27. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you." You may be seated. So, he kind of stole my opening here. Months ago, I came to him to learn about the Bible because I was going to be the leader of my school's Bible club. And being of such high esteemed position of a high school Bible club, I needed to know a lot about the Bible. And so, our first meeting, I come into his office, and he gives me like 3 main tips, which is read the Bible, pray, and then when I'm reading the Bible, annotate. And so I had a thick ESV study Bible with the onion sheet paper, and I was like, I don't want to damage that thing in any sort of way. So right after the meeting, I drove to Books A Million, and I sat in the parking lot for them to open because it was still pretty early in the morning. And when I was sitting there, I held the Bible and I was like, let me just start, I got to start somewhere. And so I started to pray. I was in that parking lot and I was just like, what book should I read? And what I'm going to say next is going to diminish my reputation immediately. But I heard 1 Samuel and I thought, that's not a book. I don't remember that. But I started to look through all the tabs, and at one point I was convinced, 100%, that it did not exist and that I was making it up. And then I found it, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm not, And so I started reading just the synopsis of the ESV Bible. And that night I went home and I started reading and annotating and stuff. And this went on for months and months. And 1 Samuel is probably completely underlined and highlighted every single verse in there because every single thing has a meaning to me now. But as I was reading through 1 Samuel, I kept in mind a idea of what to be looking for, which was a large amount of literary devices. Kenny told me that to find meaning in the Bible, you can find it through literary devices. And there were some complicated ones, some ones that I tried many times to find and failed every single time. But then there was one that stuck out to me, one I know and love, which was repetition. I love repetition. I use it all the time in my own writing. It's amazing. When you're trying to get a point across and you repeat it over and over and over again to the point of annoyance, then that's how you get something to weasel into someone's brain, it just gets in there. And I love repetition so much that I'm using repetition to talk about my love of repetition because it's just awesome. And so as I was reading through 1 Samuel, there was a word that stuck out to me over and over and over again. And this word was servant. Now, if you paid close attention, you'd notice Abigail says it a lot in her, when she comes up to David. And what's happening in this section is David is on the run from Saul, who is currently trying to kill him. And so he stays at this estate, Nabal's estate, and he stays there, and he's just out in the field, and this is a very large estate. He has 3,000 sheep, it says, so it's massive. Nabal probably doesn't even know he's there, and he's just out in this field, laying low, trying to keep away from Saul. And while he's there, Nabal sends out his sheep shearers to shear all the sheep. And while this is happening, David decides to make his men protect these people, send them out there to guard and make sure nothing bad happens to them. And after that's done, after they've been well kept, protected, David sends some of his men to go up to Nabal and ask for some food. And when this happens, Nabal is just kind of like, who is David? I don't know anybody of David. And when David hears about this, he gets really upset. This guy, I spent nights after nights after night protecting his people, and he's going to disrespect me like this. So he tells all of his men, all of his troops, to rally up. They get their swords and they start marching through the estate all the way up to Nabal. And while this is happening, Abigail is back at the actual house, and she's talking to one of her servants, and she finds out that they had come and requested food and Nabal didn't give it, and she starts to panic. She's like, oh gosh, well, I gotta make this right. And so she gets a bunch of food, she rides out there with a few of her servants, and when she gets there, she meets them on the road to come kill everyone in the house, basically. And Abigail gets down and just starts to talk to David and is like, hey, take all of Nabal's guilt, place it on me, and accept this gift. I'm really sorry. And as she's doing this, as she's saying this over and over again, she keeps referring to herself as a servant to David. She refers to David as her Lord and as his servant. Which is really interesting, because I noticed that this happened at the very beginning of 1 Samuel. You see, 1 Samuel begins with Hannah, a woman who is unable to give birth. And she has to go up to temple with her husband. And every single time that she goes, they meet this woman on the way, and she's like it describes her as her enemy, like her rival, because every single time that they go up there, this woman comes up to Hannah and starts just antagonizing her, making fun of her, just belittling her, and it makes Hannah really upset. And so one day, Hannah is going up to temple, and this woman comes again and starts making fun of her, and so she gets so fed up with it, and she starts crying, and she refuses to eat, and she's just sitting there in temple, and she comes and she starts to pray to the Lord. And she just prays to be able to have a child, to actually have a fulfillment of motherhood in her life and give birth. And as she's praying this prayer, she constantly, over and over again, says, Lord, look kindly on your servant. May pay notice to your servant, over and over again. And while this is happening, a high priest, Eli, he comes over, and he's asking her, what are you praying about? And she starts to talk to him, and she refers to him as servant again, over and over and over again. And so this stood out to me a lot, because servant, from what I can tell, when it's used in the Bible, it's used in primarily three main contexts. The first is in reference to a king. It is a person coming up to a king and being like, my liege, like a knight to a king. It's very similar of, you are here and I am here and I'm working for you in that regard. Our second context is with people who are hired, like servants or slaves who are hired and working under someone, usually a richer person. So if I'm working on Nabal's state, I would be Nabal's servant. These are usually some unnamed person that's just like, oh yeah, Saul went out to do this with his servant, blah, 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 and et cetera, et cetera. But our third one, that's what our focus on today, is the reference of the Lord, calling yourself a servant to the Lord. And we see this happen over and over and over again in the Bible. But to begin to understand it, I want to look at Hannah and Abigail's wording, what they choose to do in their very limited exposure in the Bible. Because Abigail uses this term in reference to David, saying that I'm a servant to you, my Lord David, whereas Hannah uses it for both God and Eli. And so it's interesting that they use these terms in such different ways, especially when you can almost argue that the first one of being referred to to the king, and being referred to God are very similar in manner, but they're very different in the fact that one is for God, like it has a divine connotation to it, is much different than referring to a king as a servant to a king. And so I want to look at some similarities between Hannah and Abigail's characters. We see that both of them have a deep respect for the Lord. Abigail is talking about how awesome David is because of his relation to God, how he's doing all of this stuff and how all this stuff is going to be given to him because he believes in God and because God has chosen him. And Hannah is choosing to go up to temple all the time while being harassed. She is bowing down, like praying to the Lord, begging for a child, and is constantly reassuring in her language that she is a servant to the Lord. But we also see that they have a respect for the people that the Lord has put in their life, the people that they're following the Lord. We see this through the references to Eli and David, that both of them are referred to servant multiple and multiple times over and over and over again because of a duty of respect. They understand that they're under God, that they're working for God, and so they respect them as such. Whereas it doesn't really align with the first two contexts that we've brought up before. They're not a king, they don't rule over them, and they're not hired by them. So it has to just do with a respect for the Lord and the fact that they are working for the Lord, and that respect is coming through them. And so they also are going out into dangerous situations for the Lord. Hannah is being somewhere that she's uncomfortable being, basically. You're going somewhere that you want to go to, and every single time you go there, someone is there, and they're like ready to just pounce, just to belittle you in any way that they can. It's hurtful, it's damaging, and you wouldn't want to go there anymore. Imagine going to McDonald's, and every single time you go to McDonald's, there's a guy there that's just calling you fat because you're going to McDonald's. Well, you wouldn't want to go to that McDonald's anymore. And this is church that we're talking about, so it's extremely horrible that there's a woman out there belittling her at church. But Hannah decides to persist and go anyway because of her love for the Lord. But we see Abigail in an even more dangerous situation. She is going against whatever Nabal said. She is going to throw herself in front of an armed militia of up to 400 people. She is in it. There's no way of her telling how any of this is going to go. Nabal could easily do something wrong to her, and so could David, but she is going out of her love for the Lord and out of her servitude to the Lord. And that is the key principle, is that they're both acting in God's will. Abigail goes, and when she goes, she actually stops David from doing this bloodshed, committing blood guilt. And he admits it. And we see that this is like a massive part of his character. And we'll get into the differences between him and Saul and how crucial this moment is to David's character. But it's crucial. And we see Hannah, when she makes this pact with God, when she prays to God, she says that she will give her firstborn up to the church, and he'll work for the church all his days of his life. And so this is the first kid she's ever had, and she is willing to give it up to the Lord, which is bizarre. She's never been able to have a kid before, and the second she fulfills on her pact, she gives him up. And because of that, the Lord rewards her with many more children. Now, that's a decent idea of what servant is, respect for the Lord, respect for the people that are working for the Lord, doing God's will, and being in uncomfortable or dangerous situations sometimes. But if I were to just say, here's 2 examples, that's it, then that's like a very crappy theory, it wouldn't hold up in any sort of esteemed circles of any sort. So as I've been reading through most of the Bible, I've noticed a lot more of this same speech, this constant reassurance of servant. And so don't try and turn, because you're not going to keep up. So we see that in 1 Samuel 3:10, Samuel comes to the Lord and he says, "Speak, your servant hears." And then in 1 Samuel 12:19, we see the people of Israel praying out to the Lord because they just elected Saul as king, and they're basically praying for forgiveness. And they say, "Pray for your servants, Lord." And then in 1 Samuel 14:41, we have Saul actually claiming to be a servant. He's praying to the Lord and he's saying, I am your servant, Lord. Which, I'm going to state this outright, Saul is not a servant to the Lord. Definitely not. And but we continue to see him using this language. And we see Moses use this language in Exodus 4:10. When he's talking to the burning bush, he says, Lord, I cannot speak. Listen to your servant and choose someone else, basically. And then we also see this, again, the same language in James 1:1, where James comes and he says, at the very beginning of his letter, he addresses himself as a servant to the Lord. It's like an email address thing, sincerely, James, servant of the Lord. He's just throwing it in there like a high title of recognition. So from seeing all of this, we learn that this is it's an esteemed position almost. We're not constantly throwing this language out for no reason. It has some sort of relevance, and it does require something. What that something is, we might not know yet. We have theories based on Abigail and Hannah, but we see multiple people constantly referring to themselves as servant. So it gives us the idea that this is important in some sort of way. And so my next example is Nehemiah. In chapter 1 of Nehemiah, he gives this long prayer. He prays to the Lord. And during this prayer, he claims to be a servant himself. He claims that the people of Israel are servants. And those throw more, and this is an important thing. But what I really like is that he says that Moses is a servant, which is a second-hand account calling someone else a servant, which gives us an idea that if Nehemiah is identifying Moses as a servant, then we can look at Moses and tell that that's probably a servant of the Lord. If someone else can identify and rightfully call him that, then that gives Moses a lot more credibility than Saul just saying, "Oh, I'm a servant." But that's not the best example that we can use, because again, that's just Nehemiah's opinion. The best example we can use is in 2 Samuel 3:18, where David David, I'm just going to read the whole verse. Now then, bring it about, for the Lord has promised David, saying, by the hand of my servant David. God is saying that David is his servant. He is rightfully just saying to the people, that is my servant. That he is doing what you are supposed to do, to claim this role of servant. And so, if we want to identify what it means to be a servant of the Lord, then the best person to look at would be David. And so, the biggest question that we now have to ask is, what does David do that makes him a servant of the Lord? And the answer is quite simple. He listens. He does what will bring God joy. The entirety of 1 Samuel is almost this compare and contrast essay between Saul and David. It's showing what Saul does wrong and what David does right. And the core principle at what they do differently is that David believes in the Lord. He follows the Lord's principles. He goes out, he does what will bring joy to the Lord, whereas Saul is more interested in self-preservation. He doesn't believe in the Lord. He has a bit of a cowardice, and he does what he thinks is right instead of believing in the Lord. And so I'm going to use my favorite example for both of these, which is Saul. The straw that broke the camel's back for Saul. Samuel comes to him and he tells he's like, the Lord has said for you to go out and to kill these people, this whole nation. And he gives them two very simple like prerequisites, things you cannot, these are the minimum. And it's to kill every single person and to burn all of their livestock. No crops, no people, no nothing. You can't bring anything out of there. And so Saul doesn't do that. Saul takes the king prisoner. He takes all their best livestock and crops and stuff, and and when he's caught, he's like, I was gonna give an offering, Samuel. That's what I was gonna do. And Samuel just goes and he's like, do you think the Lord wants an offering when he has asked you to obey? Saul does not obey. He goes against the Lord and he does what he thinks is right and then tries to make up for it later. And so we can see that he is not very good, but we notice the David story that reassures that he is faithful is that while on the run from Saul, he is gone out far. He's not nowhere near home now. He's kind of just deserted. And he is given 2 chances to end this whole thing, to stop the hunt, kill Saul, and be free of him. And they kind of bracket around chapter 25. In chapter 24 and 26, we have David getting Saul delivered to him. He is like a sleeping baby just at his feet. He could easily end this whole thing. He could get to go home. Everything would be fine. But on both occasions, he chooses to spare Saul's life because he recognizes Saul as an anointed one, as God's anointed one, and chooses not to kill him. Which is a very hard thing to do. When we look at Saul's character, he caves for some food. He doesn't follow God's will for some food, whereas David gets freedom and not having to be on the run, and he still chooses to do God's will over his own. And so the idea of what a servant is encapsulated in that aspect. Because we see this happening with Moses, with Samuel, Hannah, Abigail, them going out and doing something that they might not necessarily want to do, something that's a little iffy to them. But they do it because it brings glory to God. And we see this whole concept wrapped up and brought together in Romans 6:16 through 18. Do you know that if you present yourself to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness? But thanks be to God that you, who were once slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, and having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. This is saying that when you live your life in accordance to sin, when you give in to the desires of the flesh, to temptation, you become like a slave to it. Whereas when you're a slave to God, when you choose every single day to make the right decisions, to glorify Him, then you become set free from that sin into righteousness, into obedience, and just restored. And that is the truth of what being a servant to the Lord is. It is work. It is hard work. But it's work that restores you, that brings joy up in you and makes you whole again. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kenny.